When I prepare for my occasional foray to the front of the room, I have a number of things in mind. First of all, I want to engage you in this 15, 20-minute experience, and you find it stimulating and thought-provoking. But I also would like you to take some of the ideas home and enrich your week, give you some things to think about during the week. And today I have 2 or 3 ideas floating around, and I'm hopeful that I can hook those all together. I'm calling my talk Soul Responsibility. And I'm going to start with a story. It takes me back over 50 years when I was a teenager, maybe 14, 15 years old. Eddie, who was about 3 years older than me, lived across the street, and his parents had about the coolest car you could imagine. It was a 57 Ford black convertible with a white top. That was, I imagine a lot of you remember that. First one with little tail fins, and they had a big V8. And one night, Eddie got a hold of his parents' car, and 5 of us boys joined him and for a little cruise. And I didn't realize it when we got in the car, but Eddie had a 6-pack. And he'd knock down a beer and throw the empty out the window, and we would cruise, and we were getting farther away from where we lived in the suburbs, and we were out in the country, and he no doubt probably had 5, 6 beers under his belt at this time. I was in the back seat wedged between 2 guys, and all of you have ridden in a convertible with a top up. It's kind of claustrophobic in the back, and it was nighttime, late, and we're out on this road, and I'm pretty sure I still know right where this took place. Eddie decided just to see how fast the old man's car would go. And so he started accelerating, and that car was going faster and faster, and you heard that V8 working harder and harder and harder, and the wind was blowing over that convertible top, and the windows start to come in a little bit, the seals break, and oh my God, I'm going, what the hell is this all about? And all of a sudden, he lifts his foot off the accelerator, touches the brakes, and he gets ready to make a right turn, and we go off the road, and we start sliding in gravel. And I thought it was going to be an eternity before that gravel stopped, and that car got itself corrected, and we made that right turn somehow successfully. Well, I was shook up. The car was deadly silent. There was no, hey, way to go. Yeah, there was no adolescent bravado in that car at all. If there had been a ditch there, it would have been a disaster. And I vowed, as we rode back to Bernhardt Drive where I grew up, I would never get in a car with a person under the influence again. I knew that evening that I had responsibility for my life. Now, I probably thought about it at that time as sole responsibility, S-O-L-E, like a conductor has sole responsibility for directing the orchestra. But I had a sense at 15, 14, whatever I was, that I was a bit of a co-creator, and that the choices I made put me in circumstances that could put my life at risk. And I felt my life should not be recklessly put at risk. Okay? Now that was at 15 years old. I'm going to be 69 in a few weeks, so that was a long time ago, but I still think a 57 Ford convertible is pretty cool. Now, the question about making decisions and changing your behavior, I will not get into a car with a driver under the influence. And I only did it one other time after that, and that really was the beginning of an end of a very long relationship, because I got angry, and it was not a pretty ride to Danville from San Francisco. And that was the only other time I really felt I put myself under the control of an impaired person in an automobile. And I'm not a control freak. I understand life can come at you real fast. But what I want to do is be responsible for the things that I can control that are reasonable and prudent. So really, how much control really do we have over our behavior and thoughts? You know, there's a famous social biologist, E.O. Wilson. He says, hey, the way we're going in understanding genetics, we're going to be able to predict over 99% of behavior just upon genetics. Well, that's a big challenge for a religious scientist to think about, this nature, nurture. How much control do we have over our thoughts? So let me take you on just a little detour here before I come back to the nature, nurture thing. It occurred to me that, okay, I look at my mother, and she was successful in the conception of me, carrying me through 9 months of pregnancy, giving me good diet and health, and successfully delivering me in the world. I would not be here without my mother's success. And quite frankly, the role of the mother in this process is far more important than the male. The male can impregnate a woman and drop dead the next minute, and it has no effect on that process. And so I think back, okay, I had a mother, then I had 2 grandmothers who also were successful in bringing my mother into the world and my father into the world. And then I had 4 great-grandparents, 4 great-grandmothers who were successful in this process, bringing my grandparents into the world. So my parents, my grandparents, that's 2. Great-grandparents is 4. Great-great-grandparents is 8. Great-great-great-grandparents is 16, and we're only back 100 years. About 5 generations per 100 years. I'm at 16. Now if we go to 200 years, 32, 64, 128, 256, 1,012 grandparents in just 200 years. And every one of those women was successful. There wasn't a single failure, because if there was a single failure, you and I would not be here. Now, take this back to the Ice Age, 10,000 years ago, 500 generations. And not one of them failed because I would be here. And then go back to the very beginning of Homo sapiens, which they estimate is 200,000 years ago. Genetically, 1 woman and 5 men are the genetic parents of every human being on earth. But to get to me, an individualized, specific Bob Jackson, there has not been one single failure in 200,000 years. Talk about eternal life. And now I have sons and grandchildren. And now it's gone on 2 more generations. And I have a granddaughter who will be 17 in a few weeks, hopefully in about 10 years. She'll have a daughter or a son. And I'll see it go on another generation. But I don't think we stop to think about the fact that we are all successful winners in this genetic process. All of the people that died of disease, the bubonic plague, smallpox, measles, polio, not part of me. Not part of you. So I read this book this summer by Steven Pinker called Blank Slate. And he talks about human nature and the myths about human nature, and he's a strong believer in genetics and how it conditions our behavior and how much of who we are comes from our genetic makeup. So a couple of years ago, I get together with 7 other men, all but one retired, all about my age. We get together for dinner once a month at one of our homes. And usually the guys do most of the cooking, okay? In some cases, they're bachelors, they do all of the cooking. And this has been going on about 7 years, and we never missed a month. Holidays, we may take December off. So it's the guys around the dinner table talking. And some of us know each other quite well, others didn't know each other. And so one of the fellows decided, hey, we ought to start doing a little writing before we get together and send it out a few days before we get together, and we could read some things. So we did things like, what was your first sense of place? Where did you go on your first vacation? How did movies influence you? Tell us about what you were doing in 1968, critical political year in our generation. On and on, we had this list. And one of them was, why do you do what you do? Why do I do what I do? Because that gets back to my original issue about that car ride. I wanted to change my behavior, and it had to take a change of thought. Okay? Why do I do what I do? So I made a list. And the reason why I brought the genetic story up is when I look back at my list of about 9, 10 things, an awful lot of what I see as the determinants of my behavior, I see as genetically determined. It's the slate which I get to draw other things in with the colored chalk that I pick up. But the slate is pretty well defined. I'm a male, I'm white. Hey, for 500 years, white men have run the world. It gives you a hell of a lot of opportunity to be a white male. Okay? I was born in the world of opportunity. I have a body type, a blood type, and all of those kinds of things, blue eyes. All of these things come to me from this long genetic history. I have a certain intellect. And there's clear evidence. There's these wonderful studies of identical twins that are separated at birth and then studied when they're young adults and adults. And the similarities is sometimes striking. And intellect is an inherited trait. Now, certainly, a development of a child's intellect can be affected by nutrition, a mother's drug abuse, and an awful lot of other things. But our intellect is something we bring into the world. What we do with it is another question. And then there are certain things like my disease resistance. You know, when Columbus came to the New World, on board his ship was a sailor infected with smallpox. And in subsequent contacts between the Old World and New World, influenza, cholera, and a bunch of other contagious diseases were brought to the New World. 95% of the inhabitants of the Western Hemisphere died of contagious diseases brought by Europeans because they had no natural built-up immunities. This is the greatest Holocaust in history. And, you know, we can think about it in a lot of different ways, and there's been a lot of different explanations for this, but that was almost destined to happen no matter what, because the Western Hemisphere, the people living in this part of the world did not grow up in close contact with domesticated animals. And things like smallpox and measles and influenza and chicken pox, all are diseases that started in barnyard animals, went through genetic modifications, moved into human beings, and human beings, after a tremendous loss of life, those who had the immunity survived and passed on, and that's why when you had measles as a kid, you lived. And so I have certain predispositions towards some diseases, and I have predispositions against certain diseases. That's sort of what I buy into as the genetic part of myself. And then there are certain things like disposition and emotions. And we have a new little grandchild in our family. He's just 8 months old. And Mandy and I spend quite a bit of time with him. He's a happy child. He's a happy child. He was smiling the second day of his life. It wasn't a gas bubble. You know, that used to be something I used to hear, you know, from my mother's generation. Oh, he's not smiling, he has a gas bubble. No, this child is happy. He laughs. He giggles. He goes to sleep easily. He gets up in a good mood. He likes to play. Not all babies are that way. We all know that. If you've ever had a colicky or chronically whiny baby, oh my God, it's a different experience. And if you've had more than one child, you all know they swam out of the same gene pool, but they're not the same. I have two sons that are very different. I have one son is an alpha male, and the other one is like me. He's not. Where did this alpha male come from? He's a wonderful person, but I look at him and go, and his mother looks at him and goes, where did you come from? We don't get it. So we bring these things into the world, including our dispositions and attitudes. But then there are a lot of other things that go on to the nurture side. Family. I grew up with a family that was a little crazy, and lots of drama, lots of excitement. I'm the third of 4 children. My 2 older brothers are still with me. We remember the same things. We share the same funny stories. We think about our parents mostly in the same way. I grew up in a very rich emotional environment with my family and went through some real crises. My 2 brothers had polio in the summer of 1952. My dad had a mild case. That makes a big impact on a family. And my father had heart disease. And so family's important. And even what order you're born in. Mandy's the first of 4 children. You know, she's that king of the roost. You know, I'm the number 1 child. I keep telling her, it's too bad you didn't have 2 older brothers, you know, like I did. Family, diet, what you eat, popular culture. I mean, I came of age with hula hoops and Elvis and Sputnik and rock and roll and, oh my gosh, the Beatles and things. What an impact that had. What an impact. And there was a lot of things of challenging old mores and ways of life, and it opened the world to me. I have no doubt about it. And then life's experiences. Accidents, you buzz off a finger, you know. You remember that the next time you turn on a power saw. You know, your work. Did you have good work experiences or bad work experiences? Were you abused? Were you injured in some way? What kind of relationships were you in? What were your parenting experiences like with your own children? And those things all kind of meld together to make us who we are. And when you take all of these things in, and I invite you to go home today or this week and put on the top of a piece of paper, why do I do what I do? And reflect on your own life and what things formed you, shaped you. And in my mind, if you really want to fundamentally change, it's extremely difficult. You know, it's easy to say, well, we'll buy a Honda instead of a Jeep this time. That's a change. But let's talk about real fundamental change, real basic change. This past March, we had a really cold spell. And down in Chico, where we live, there was a couple of nights where it was down to about 18 degrees. That's pipe bursting, tree killing, fruit tree killing weather. Okay, and we very, very seldom get it. And in my 43 years here in the valley, that's only the second time I remember weather that cold. And we live out towards the end of the Esplanade, and there's a new little recreation area called DeGarmo Park, and it was on a Sunday afternoon. It was very clear, very cold, and I was over there just doing some walking by myself. And as I come around past the dog play area, I see a person with a red coat huddled up on a bench and really huddled down tight. And I can't get a look at him. He's just huddling to stay warm. As I walk by, I hear this little voice say, do you know where the Jesus Center is? And I stop and I immediately recognize that this is not a homeless man. This is a boy. Boy, man. He was 18. And I talked to him for a few minutes, and so I told him where the Jesus Center was, and he asked me about another place where there's supposed to be youth services, and that's down by Smythe Tire down there in the downtown. I didn't even know where it was. And then I thought, okay, I gave him the information. I started walking. Thinking. Turned around. Walked back. And said, I'll take you. I'll take you to Jesus Center. Come, we'll go get my car. It's over in the parking lot. So we start talking, and Steve is 18 years old, nice-looking boy, been beat up, had a black eye and a bruise, just been booted out of foster care. He was completely on his own. He was trying to get up to Corning. He'd been mugged the night before, had spent the night on the street in Chico, told me he almost froze to death. They wouldn't let him stay inside at 7-Eleven, they weren't permitted to do that, and he was facing another equally cold night. So I took Steve down to the Jesus Center, and there was no one there. It was 5 o'clock. I thought they gave dinner about 5:15. No one was there. I went over to the other address. No one was there. So I thought, all right, the Tourist Center. I'll try the Tourist Center. So I took them over to the Tourist Center, which is out by Silver Dollar Fairground, and they said they would try to help. I gave them some money, and I left there upset. You know, there's this thing about empathy and sympathy. When a person's caught in the river and they're being raced down, you don't want to jump in the river with them. He told me he had a learning disability, he had a little speech impediment, he's a very nice looking young man. They hadn't finished high school, he'd had a foster family up in Corning, they didn't want him coming back because he hadn't met their behavioral expectations, but he were the only people that ever showed him any kindness, and he was trying to get up to Corning to see if they would reconsider and help him. So that's where I left it. That's where I left it. Came home, talked to Mandy about it. And I put out in the universe, I need to find a way that my talents can help, that I can do something, to make a contribution, that an 18-year-old kid like this should not be out on the streets. And I looked into a couple of things. I've been in Rotary, I've been in other things and done service clubs and stuff, and I looked into some things and CASA and some other things. It just didn't resonate. And then one Sunday here in church, Jennifer, who I had first met 25 years ago, that she had told me not long before this, that said, oh, you don't probably remember, but you came into the freshman thematic that I was enrolled, and you gave a guest presentation, and I was so excited I went and changed my major. What a nice thing to say. Well, on this occasion, Jennifer said, do you know anything about Skyway House? I said, no, I don't. She said, I want to tell you about it and see if you would be interested in being on the board of directors. We have a vacancy. I think you'd be good. So it turns out there are at least 5 of us here in this congregation who are either on the board or who work for Skyway House. We have a real connection between this congregation and this recovery program organization. And so I just put my toe in the water, and I'm not really in a position to talk very much about Skyway House because I'm just at the bottom of the learning curve. But I have been involved in some rather intense early experiences, including board meetings, a couple board meetings, and a board orientation, which took hours, and then their annual fundraising dinner. Making a decision not to get into a car with an intoxicated driver is small potatoes compared to an addicted person making the decision to get sober. It's small potatoes for a person who has been victimized their whole life to try to get their self-esteem. It's small potatoes for a young man who's gone off to war and lost limbs and has to reimagine his future. There are small decisions that we make, and then there are profound decisions that some people are called upon to deal with. When I talked to them at Skyway House, I said, well, you know, having been an academic administrator for many years, we're always asking, how do you know you're successful at what you're doing? So I ask, how do you know you're doing a good job? And they said, well, if you're asking us after one 6-week period in a recovery home and then some follow-up that we have 100% sobriety for the rest of people's lives, don't kid yourself. It doesn't work that way. But maybe the second time the person goes into a relapse, they suddenly have a set of skills. They know people to contact. They know about AA. They have a lifeline that's been given to them. So they can take hold of that. And maybe they'll be back with us again or in another treatment program. It may take 2 or 3 times. But see, at the core of this experience of changing your thinking about yourself, am I a worthy, decent, sober human being, to acting and living that with the behavior. That's the kind of stuff that E.O. Wilson, when he talks about, I can predict 99%, blah, 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 blah. Well, great, you can predict 99%. I'm telling you the 1% of the stuff is important. That's the important stuff, and that's what this church talks about, is that 1%, the important stuff. Just because I'm 99% like, or the same genetic material of a monkey or a baboon or a chimpanzee doesn't mean I'm anything like them. And just because you can say I can predict 99% of behavior based upon genetic of our species, it doesn't tell me the important stuff. So, that experience, when I was a kid, I was feeling soul responsibility, S-O-L-E. When I dip into the turbulent waters of Skyway House, now I'm aware of soul responsibility. Now, I used to think soul was sort of that little inner voice, oh, Bobby, don't you do that. You're going to get your mom mad at you, or you're going to get yourself in trouble, just that little still inner voice, which I think is very important. That's what maybe soul used to mean to me. And then I looked at, one of my hearing aids is going out. It just started beeping at me. I looked at that guy, Thomas More, who wrote those books, Soulmate and Care of the Soul. They were very popular about 20 years ago. Everyone was reading them. Everyone was looking for their soulmate or something that was just going to drop out of the sky. But he says soul is not a thing, but a quality or a dimension of experiencing life and ourselves. It has to do with depth, value, relatedness, heart, and personal substance. I do not use the word here as an object of religious belief or something to do with immortality. It's like saying, hey, brother, you got soul, or that music is soulful. That's all he means by it. Now, what does Ernest Holmes say? First, when you look at it, you go, huh? But then when I started thinking about it, it makes sense. The subjective side of life, the creative medium, it takes the thought of the conscious mind and acts upon it. The universe responds to thought and reflects back. So he means soul not as individualized, is a dimension of universal mind. Now the reason why I tell the story of my encounter with Skyway House is I consciously, as a member of this teaching, put out in the universe, I want to do something, and I don't know what it is. But I'm open and receptive when something comes along. I'm awake, there's something calling to me, and I'm trusting the universe to bring me an experience that will use my skills. Then, there's more to it than that. It's for the people involved in the process. Because for it to work, they have to make the same kind of declaration, that they are open and receptive to change. Everyone that I've come across that talks about the recovery movement talks about a recognition in the participants of a spiritual dimension of themselves. Whether it's a 12-step program, which Skyway House, I'm told, is not. It has its own model of recovery, its own therapy. It's hard work. I remember that movie a few years ago called Secrets, and I was really offended by it because it made it look like this whole thing would just put it out there and careful, it's going to hit you on the head when it drops into your lap. I'm sorry, you got to treat with your feet. I can do all the prayer treatments in the world that I want a novel published, which is one of the things I love to do is creative writing. But until I write the novel, I don't have any chance of getting it published, and it's not going to write itself. So treating for it without working at it doesn't work. And so when I came in contact visiting the residencies and talking to the staff members and being engaged in the work where people are really trying to change their thinking in order to change their life, I appreciated the hard work, the group work, the group therapy, the individual counseling, this getting in touch with your core belief system. Reverend Carolyn McCune, of course, has her roots in this church where her husband John was minister for many years. Carolyn used to say to us down at the Chico Church, it's not what you think you believe. It's not what you want to believe. It's not what you hope you believe. It is what you really believe. And most people are not in touch with their core beliefs. That's why studying science of mind, one, is so much of peeling that away to get down to your core beliefs. Change your thinking, change your life requires changing how you think about yourself. And when Eddie Huntley about killed me, I changed the way I thought about myself. I am not going to be reckless. I'm not going to put my life at risk like this. This is crazy. And when I come in contact with people who are at rock bottom saying, this is crazy, I want to change my life, they are doing the really deep work that Ernest Holmes calls us to. Most of us live pretty darn healthy lives. They've had great lives with great experiences. But we've had children and brothers and cousins and parents and things that are in deep trouble. And this teaching really calls us, I think, to that hard, deep work of changing your thinking and changing your life. And so Eddie, I believe he's still alive. I believe he lives in the house that his parents did, believe it or not, the last I heard. I hope you've slowed down. I hope you didn't kill anyone. And I hope you stopped drinking, because he was drinking heavily at 17 and 18. So, Skyway House, 500 generations of ancestors since the Ice Age are all standing here. Let me just add one other little thing, and then I'll give it up. I was back visiting my brother. I visited both of my brothers. Mandy and I visited both of my brothers. I was back doing some work in Washington, D.C., and when it was done, we flew up to Buffalo, where I grew up, Buffalo area, and spent some time with my brother. And he's got a bunch of boxes that were in my mother's basement, now they're in his, and we were going through them. And I found a little biography of my grandfather, Jackson. And he was a lawyer, very involved in politics. He really was kind of a Clarence Darrow, represented the underdogs. When a company was trying to break a strike, he represented all of the strikers, and they were being charged with very serious crimes, got them all off. He loved to public speak. He enjoyed time in his garden. I'm going, he passed before I was born. I go, wow, I'm more like him than I was like my father. How similar. He loved books. He loved to write. I even have some of his books in the library in my living room. How interesting. And sometimes I think we understand ourselves better when we look at our grandparents and we look at our own parents, because they're so close and we had so many emotional kinds of things that we may not see those patterns when we look back. But Skyway House, the hard work, and the aspects of this teaching, declaring that you're open and receptive, declaring that you allow the universe to work through you as means, as an instrument. This is our fundamental teaching, and that's my three kind of disparate thoughts that I tried to begin to pull together. So make your list this week. Why do you do what you do? Thank you very much.